Hi, Anne. Can you hear me?
Hello. How are you?
Well, I'm okay, but you can't see me, can you?
No, I can't.
Oh,
I wonder why. You can see me, can you?
I can. I don't know. It says the camera's on, but for some reason it's not working. I'm just going to log out and log back in, see if I get any joy.
Don't worry.
Okay,
As long as you can
I'll be
see
back.
us.
Yeah, I can see you.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you.
You still can't see me now. I think you're going to have a blank screen. That's bad, isn't it? I've had to move room, and for some reason the camera's not working in here.
Yeah, no, it's just a blank screen.
Right.
We've had the same problem.
Strange.
We've been moving from room to room trying to make it work.
I think it's the new teams, you know. A lot of people are having this problem from what I'm talking to them. Here we go. I'm afraid you're going to have to put up with a black screen and just listen to my voice. Bore da, I think we're going to start. Can everybody hear me? Can you put your thumbs up if you can? Right, I have an issue with my camera. Obviously, it's not working today. It's a common issue at the moment with new teams, and I don't know why, because it was working half an hour ago. Just going through the agenda there. So if you bear with me, can you put your thumbs up if you can hear me? Sorry, because I'm not sure I had the poster. I have to stop sharing because I can't say. Great. Okay, so croeso i'r webinar Iechyd a Gofal Cymru. Welcome to the Rural Health and Care Wales webinar. We got two talks today. We've got Dr. Fiona Liddell, and I can see Fiona's online there. And then we've got John Goudie and Kat. I'm not sure if it's Kat. I can see Catherine there. I don't know if John's presenting today or Kat, but they're going to present after Fiona's done her initial piece for us on volunteering for health and care outcomes. But before we go into the first presentation, just a few housekeeping. When the speaker's on, I'll pin them to the center screen. When the speaker's finished, if you can keep all your questions until after they finish the presentation, you can either put them in the chat box or you can raise your hand by using the icon at the top. When the presenter's talking, can you please keep your microphones on mute? And if there's any comments you want to comment in addition to the questions, you can raise that, like I said, after the presenter's spoken. We've got 2 presentations and 2 question and answer sessions. And then after that, we'll go on to a quick Mentimeter evaluation. So I'll share my screen here, which obviously works because I just shared the poster. And I'll give you a code, which is, if everybody wants to get ready, it's 78216801, and I'll put that in the chat, but it'll also be in the slide I share afterwards. I'll write it down now. So when you go on, it'll just ask you for a code to join, and then you put in the code on a smartphone or computer. There it is. And you'll be able to just use a sliding scale to rate the presentations in terms of how interesting you thought they were and how relevant they were to you, either personally or to your work. And just before, a few, in addition to housekeeping, just a few notices that I'm going to take this opportunity to tell you about. That it's the Royal Welsh Show next week. I don't know if anybody's going, but if you are, please come and visit us. We're in I think it's stand number 481 in Avenue D. So it's not the one behind the pavilion, the one behind. We've got a few events on. We've got 2 events where we're showing the Sustainable Communities project that we're running. And we've got 1 event where Becky's going to be talking about the research she's doing on the rural cancer patient experience. That one's on the Monday afternoon, 2 till 4. The Sustainable Community ones are projects we're running in Lampeter and Llanidloes. And there's going to be one on Tuesday morning between 10 to 12, the Llanidloes one. And then on Thursday morning between 10 and 12, we've got Lampeter one. And Mary will be there and Lottie will be there to explain what they're doing in both communities and how they're trying to develop a team of volunteers to support vulnerable people in the communities to live at home independently and to live full social lives for as long as possible. And having said that, that's an ideal introduction, I suppose, to Fiona and the work that you're going to present to us today. You've done 2 pieces of work, you've told me, on volunteering and the value that volunteering brings, and not only to the people or the organisations that they support, but to volunteers themselves who also benefit from the act of giving. So we're a bit early, but are you able to start, Fiona? Are you able to share your own presentation, or did you want us to do it for you?
I'm happy for you to do it, Anna.
Okay, I'll do that, and you'll just have to tell me when to do the next slide.
Yeah. Okay.
Can people see that?
That's better, isn't it? That's on the presenter mode. Well, bore da. Good morning, everybody. It's good to see you and have the chance to share some of the work that we've been doing recently. I'm employed by WCVA, Wales Council for Voluntary Action, and the project I'm involved with is known as Helpforce Cymru. See the logo in the bottom. Work very closely with Helpforce in UK, which works right across the UK, but we're separate in Wales, and we do some things jointly, some things separately, but this post that I'm in was kind of kicked off really by Helpforce, which has an aim really of producing a step change in volunteering within health and care services, and particularly in trying to grow the evidence base that supports strategic developments that can, lead to support and greater investment in volunteering within health particularly, but health and social care obviously increasingly is the agenda. So next slide, please. This is my Chris Whitty moment, isn't it? So that's Helpforce Cymru. It began in 2019 in Wales, and so we're into 5 years. By now, it's supported fully by Welsh Government, and we are talking to Welsh Government about the next phase of the work. It's part of a wider project within WCVA, which is about the third sector and health and social care. So my brief within that is to focus particularly on the volunteering aspect and implications. And just, I'm sure to point out, you don't really need me to, that volunteering and third sector aren't the same thing. Volunteering happens within statutory bodies as well as third sector, whereas the third sector is that voluntary community charitable organisations that are independently constituted, but sometimes work very closely with the health system. So a little bit about where this paper has come from. The one I'm going to focus on is called The Values and Value of Volunteering. There are links in the slides here, which we will circulate afterwards. That came as a result of some work that I was able to do with the Bevan Commission, Social Care Wales, and a consultant, Richard Newton Consulting. During COVID, we had a grant from Welsh Government, what they call a volunteering strategic grant, and we're able to do some work through the consultant, particularly in contacting and talking to lots of organisations with focus groups and so on, with the aim then of us trying to develop a bit of a kind of framework. How do you get your head around what is volunteering in relation to our health system? Where does it fit? How do you support it? How do you monitor it? Who is implicated? Where can you find information and so on? So we developed out of that work a framework. We called it a framework for volunteering in health and social care. It sits on our website. There's a link towards the end of the presentation. And that was aimed really to support and to stimulate conversation really about where volunteering might come within sort of delivery of health outcomes. The point is, having done that work, which involved a lot of kind of groundwork, talking to people, looking at evidence, reading papers and so on, I was then invited by the Bevan Commission to write this paper, something that they could publish. As you may know, the Bevan Commission is a bit of a think tank in health and in health services particularly. So papers get kind of scrutinised and signed off by their commissioners and published in their names. So I was delighted to be able to do that. Subsequently, the story has continued. We asked the Bevan Commission whether they'd be interested in us doing some work to develop a companion paper, which we then called The Values and Value of the Third Sector. And so we worked, they were keen on that. We worked with the same consultant, Richard Newton, who did a lot of fresh research, particularly looking at the connectivity between third sector organisations and statutory institutions, bodies of various kinds, the challenges, the collaborations that happen, the opportunities, and so that second paper was published just in June, and we launched it at our big annual GovOdd Tree event, which WCVA instigates each year. So there's a link to that. Then, having done a lot of work for that paper and finding we had far too much to put into one paper, we had to keep it quite focused. We kept it really to the sort of touch points between third sector, voluntary sector and statutory sectors. But there was a whole lot more that we felt we wanted to say that we couldn't squeeze into that paper naturally without making it too unwieldy. So hence the fallout from it, if you like, became the kernel of a third paper, which is, why the third sector matters to health and social care in Wales. And that really celebrates more the need for an independent, thriving community and voluntary sector with all its implications for well-being, participation, low-level mental, physical well-being in various ways of engaging and evolving people, but not so much the sort of where does this kind of touch the agenda of the statutory services, but more seeing it as a kind of a really vital but more preventative and long-term, aspect of the health and care ecosystem, if you like, that one that has that kind of preventative touch. So can we move on to the next slide, please? So each of those papers, as you see, had, we're all looking at similar things, but looking through different lenses, really, I suppose. This slide shows you something about what we mean by volunteering. It's sometimes hard to talk about volunteering because it is such a wide range of things. At one end, it can be very informal, like helping out your neighbour and babysitting circles or doing a stand at the PTA or whatever. very informal, very casual. It may be one-off. At the other end of the spectrum, it may be something that is highly skilled. Think of our rescue services. It may be, you know, a long-term commitment. It may be was surrounded by a lot of important government and, you know, risk assessment and support of various kinds. And anywhere in between, perhaps the in-between will be things like activities through a community centre or through a local organisation. So there's a degree of formality. So I think we always need to remember, you know, if we just talk about volunteering generally, what kind of volunteering are we talking about? Yeah, that's perhaps all we need to say. And just that the diagram, I suppose, tries to show that, you know, the amount of informal volunteering is obviously hugely more than the amount of formal. But for the paper that I'm referring to, we were really focusing more on the formal end. That's the end where you can kind of shape a role and remit, support around it, expect some kind of interaction between the volunteer and staff and other players within their health and social care system. And all of the work that we did then, we wanted to build on the gains of COVID. COVID was a great time for raising the profile. It enabled better partnerships between sectors. It inevitably led to more flexible governance. People kind of re-looked at the norms and regulations that had previously applied, and in this new world we found new ways of doing things. From the third sector's point of view, it was felt to lead to more equal relationships where actually their contribution was kind of recognised and their voice heard in a different way. But the whole spectrum is important. Now let's move on to the next slide. Thanks. So from the point of view of sort of a statutory perspective on health and social care, it is recognised now within the workforce strategy, the joint workforce strategy that was published, I think, 2019, that we need to see volunteers and volunteering as a part of that wider workforce. And so that is reflected in one of the actions, one of the commitments within the strategy here, that they just felt what they could realistically commit to is a commitment to understand better what is the extent of involvement, the contribution, the potential of volunteers and carers in this context of kind of thinking about that wider workforce and how to kind of plan for that. So quite a bit of my work actually rests on the back of this, you know, a lot of work with Social Care Wales and Health Education Improvement Wales as they think through a workforce lens, knowing that you can't treat volunteers the same as staff. They're not pawns to be manipulated. They're not people to be exploited. It's different, but it does perhaps have a role, a more important role in our systems for health and care in the future. So let's move on, please. One of the challenges then, you know, if you're trying to encourage, as Helpforce calls it, a step change in volunteering in the system, one of the challenges is producing evidence, because, you know, without acceptable and convincing evidence, something isn't really visible and it can't be kind of taken seriously unless you can prove the case. That's the way we tend to work. So to be taken seriously, how do we get more evidence about the value of volunteering? People on the ground usually know it, you know, you kind of recognise good when you see it, but we need data, we need stories and so on. So that does pose some challenges for volunteering and for third sector organisations, actually. I mean, one is that I feel very strongly volunteering leads to multiple outputs. You might have a volunteer in place to achieve a particular thing, perhaps to positively enhance the experience of patients in some context or another, but as well as perhaps an outcome that you could look at through a clinical lens. There'll be the emotional, there'll be the practical support, there'll be the impact on the volunteer, there'll be the benefits to various parties and in various ways. Means the whole point of volunteering is that it isn't just kind of focused as specifically as job roles would be, but the human interaction, the flexibility, the kind of mutuality about it means that there are other benefits. And so capturing something of that is it can be quite hard. There is no consistent framework, so people use different methodology, terminology, scale and approach to trying to prove the worth of what is happening, what voluntary activities are underway. And another is that volunteering is successful because of a wider structures. And I'm thinking particularly of things like, the County Voluntary Council structures or the umbrella bodies that support small organisations. So this is partly the subject of the other paper about the value of the third sector. There's an interrelationship between all these organisations. So just looking at the positive impact of one or few volunteers in one organisation can ignore the fact that that's only possible because of all the other relationships around that fund it, that support it, that advise, they offer training, there's, safeguarding advice, all that. So, where do you stop and start in a measuring value? One thing that came out very strongly in our more recent work is that many of the people we spoke to struggled with the idea of value of volunteering and actually preferred to talk in terms of public benefit. I think because value is so often associated with monetary value, and for some of the reasons I've already mentioned, monetary value just didn't seem to do justice to the kind of breadth of value that people felt was important to flag. And then the other is data versus story. On the whole, there are lots of stories about volunteering. We're quite good at telling the stories of change, and they're really, really important. The more challenging is gathering data that is comparable to other data that has validity and enough to be a substantial source of evidence. So there are approaches, people use the theory of change, if this, then this should happen. Let's see if it does. Some have tried the social return on investment, lots of consultations with different stakeholders to see how far they value some of the changes that have happened. And then more of a story-based approach that can be used, the most significant change where people contribute stories from their experience and collectively try to hone down which are the stories that tell the important truths that need to be conveyed. But also who pays for it, who does it, where's the expertise, and so on. A number of challenges face us here. Let's move on to the next slide, please. One organisation that has tried quite hard to increase our evidence base is Helpforce, who I mentioned earlier. They use a kind of theory of change model. What are the changes we expect to see, usually within hospital or community settings, but under the auspices of the NHS? What's the data that we need? What's the evidence that we need to prove that hypothesis, if you like? So they've done huge amounts of work, very well worth having a look on their website. They work with NHS partners. They help to find funding from different sources and therefore are sometimes able to offer grant funding for pilot project. They can support with developing these projects, project design, if you like, designing the evaluation and then helping with that data, not with the data collection. I mean, the projects do that, but it's submitted through a portal. So all the kind of data number crunching, analysis and report writing and reflecting back to people in useful quotes and diagrams and things, what is happening in terms that can be used in business case plans and that sort of thing. So we've done a number of projects with Helpforce in Wales. But they're working all over the UK. The data that they collect can often be amassed and amalgamated. So the evidence is a growing evidence base as organisations take on similar projects and data can be combined, obviously, so that strengthens the sort of conclusions that can be drawn. So the next slide, please, Anna. I don't expect you'll be able to see it, but this is just a screenshot from their website, which shows how, it's live updates on some of the projects they're supporting. At the bottom, you see the red lines, which just show how far projects are through the process. So those that are just at the design stage have got one, and you can see one at the bottom, third along, that's kind of completed. So it's finished the design and right through to the evaluation stage. But amongst them, you'll see an Erin Bevan, which is one of our current projects in Wales, and mental health volunteers with mental health issues or mental health history, seeking volunteering, and in many cases thinking about career opportunities. So it's kind of combining two strands, thinking about mental health service, both about mental health patients and their journey, if you like, as volunteers. They are being placed to work within mental health services, so there's that aspect, but also thinking about the volunteer to career idea, which is another strand of work. You can see some of the projects on this slide are specifically noted as being volunteer to career projects, but we've got hospital at home, discharge support, bereavement. There are some community ones, community fridge that's been evaluated, community hubs in Cornwall. The volunteer ambulance services are looking at low acuity volunteers, like community first responders. I think in Wales we call them community welfare responders, so call outs to people where hospitalisation is not seen to be likely, and more low-level support and reassurance is likely to be needed. So that's a really interesting project in Wales. So Helpforce helped with the evaluation of something like that in northwest of England. And a number of projects for people on waiting lists, with the aim of trying to bring down waiting lists, volunteers checking in with people, perhaps for reassurance, perhaps just to check whether their condition has changed, and to be able to sort of pass on information about whether a patient should move up or down the waiting list priorities. So next slide, please. So that work of Helpforce is really helpful. It is very much aimed at that formal end. It's quite kind of clinical oriented, really. It's only one part of that broad spectrum of volunteering, but one thing they are able to do, I think, is building up some of that evidence which we all can draw on right across the UK. That's useful for us all. So why might health boards or regional partnership boards think about investing in volunteering? What might be some of the kind of outcomes that are anticipated, if you like? Well, these are some. Reducing non-attendance, which obviously is hugely wasteful to the system. The Waiting Well projects is where variations on volunteers checking in with people on waiting lists for various specific reasons. Meet and greet, so people don't get lost. Timely discharge. There are a number of projects that are aimed at volunteers supporting patients to maintain their mobility in the wards so that they are able more quickly to reach the level of rehabilitation, recuperation, that they are ready to go. Very popular role in many health boards is to take out pharmacy runs, where volunteers go and fetch the medication from the pharmacy on the last day, and there's been calculations of how many minutes of staff time that takes and so on, and that all adds up to a sort of evidence of where volunteers can help to reduce the pressures on the system in that way. And then more local delivery. Well, the community welfare responders that I referred to, one of the points of that is that by training lots of volunteers in a locality, people can be on the scene and with somebody who's called 999 for seemingly low acuity reasons. They can be there very quickly, much quicker than an ambulance would be likely to get there. And very often it doesn't even need hospitalisation or doesn't need an ambulance. So the situation can be dealt with more local. Wonderful example of the hearing clinics that's in the paper, with the Action for Hearing Loss Royal, remember, RNID, isn't it? The Royal National Institute for the Deaf. They've changed their name. With community clinics in Powys, in community centres, church halls and so on, for people to come and have hearing aid batteries changed or cleaned or whatever. And very often the volunteers who do that also have hearing aids, so there's kind of peer-to-peer thing. Cups of tea and chats are involved. It's informal, it's not clinical, but crucially it involves people who have these kind of very basic, needs for attention for their hearing equipment. It saves them a long round journey to Wrexham Hospital or wherever the nearest one is. If you live in Powys, it's a long way to any general hospital. So next slide. So as well as reducing pressures, I mean, this is a really important one. I think that the adding value, volunteers adding value often is not about saving staff time, it's not about saving money, but it can be much more about enhancing the experience of people, that companionship, having time, which is so precious. And so staffs generally are so short of time, aren't they? There's so much that has to be completed and accomplished. So one of the projects that we did with Helpforce was about the companionship at end of life, with 3 different health boards in Wales. People trained to come and have time to sit with people, maybe in silence, maybe holding a hand, maybe showing things on an iPad, whatever. And with this strong underlying belief that people shouldn't be left alone if there are no relatives to come, shouldn't be left to die on their own. Well-being activity and stimulation, activity on the ward, in the day room, people, geriatric wards, mental health wards, instead of people who are mentally able being left alone and bored, there are all sorts of ways in which volunteers might engage socially and emotionally and intellectually with them. Peer support, hugely important area. You think of all the charitable organisations that specialise in heart or kidney or diabetes or whatever, where there are people who have lived experience of conditions who can support other people in the community with the day-to-day implications of living with chronic conditions. So much of our healthcare isn't just the clinical, it's all that kind of wider social and emotional aspects around it. And I think that's where volunteers, particularly with that peer support, lived experience to offer, can give so much. And then culture and language, some lovely examples of organisations that are able to recruit volunteers who between them speak, I'm thinking of one, between them they speak 13 different languages in an area of Cardiff and can offer counselling and advocacy and befriending support. So that understanding and linguistic diversity can just extend the kind of credible reach of a health service by the use of volunteers. So next one, please. But it's not all about the value of the volunteering to those of us who care about developing effective and sustainable systems. It's about the volunteer as well. As Anna said at the beginning, volunteers don't get paid, so they must have a reason for doing this. They must get something out of it. And just thought I'd flag this is the best survey that we have really to date, that was done by the National Council for Voluntary Organisations a few years back, interviewing lots of different volunteers and highlighting, pulling out from that, what are the things that matter to volunteers. So that's an important guide for anybody involving volunteers about the sort of things that need to be considered. It's not rocket science. It needs to be enjoyable, for example, and flexible. It is voluntary. It needs to be meaningful. And I think that's why so many people are attracted to volunteering in health and social care, because it feels, there's a natural purpose, and that, engaging in something that is purposeful, you can sort of see the benefit of it to other people, is enormously rewarding. Let's move on. I won't dwell on that. You can look at it at your leisure. No, time is ticking. We do have a lot in place already, and I think our understanding and resourcing and expectations of volunteering have changed hugely in the time that I've been in WCVA, which is sort of 20 years now. Going back almost 20 years ago, in fact, it is 20 years, 2004, we had the first UK quality mark for volunteer management. So it's a bit like investing in investors in people. This is called investing in volunteers. And that can be accessed anywhere in the UK, but it sets out kind of benchmark of professional practice for volunteer management, really. So it's a mark for organisations to demonstrate their sort of professionalism in the way that they can organise and support and enable volunteering within their context. We, at the beginning of the Helpforce Cymru project in Wales, we worked with the unions in Wales to develop a charter for volunteering and workplace relationships. Really important in a context like NHS, where I mean, most volunteering within the health board context gets discussed with staff side and needs union approval, because obviously, you know, decisions about where boundaries occur, you know, are really important for justice and for buy-in from everyone and for that sort of support. So this was a useful, I think, series of conversations which led to some principles really that just help to ensure that, you know, people are considering, you know, justice and boundaries on the in equal measure, and not usurping or creating a common understanding, perhaps, is the positive way of putting it. The framework for volunteering I mentioned earlier, that was really the project that kicked off this paper on values of volunteering. There are volunteer standards and learning resources. This was developed in England. We published it in Wales. It doesn't have any particular great standing. In England, it's the basis of a qualification. It wasn't quite so easy to do that, to translate that for Wales, because there are a number of things that are a bit different here. But it is reads a bit like a syllabus, a kind of induction outline, perhaps. So that is available. We have this growing evidence of impact, and those pages on the Helpforce website are really quite inspiring, really, reading some of the stories and some of the number crunching reports that have been produced on the back of those pilot works. And there are growing networks of support. I mean, not least Helpforce Cymru, the network that meets every quarter that I convene. But there are also networks of alliances. You know, the cancer charities meet together, and neurological conditions charities work. So there are those sort of networks that provide infrastructures of support and inspiration. So next slide, please. And we are nearing the end, Anna. We did come up with a number of recommendations, and it was a little bit of a kind of, what would we like to see? What should things look like? And so this, in summary, is some of the things that, you know, would be great to see in the next 10 years. You know, more dialogue, so that when issues are identified, like waiting lists or whatever, you know, as people sit down and think, oh, how can we get around this? That the idea of volunteering being a part of that solution gets considered, because there are some things that volunteers can do better than paid staff, I would maintain, where they can bring something of themselves, you know, be themselves in a particular context, offer that kind of human contact and shared experience sometimes, and time ultimately. We need a bit of culture change. There is a bit of kind of risk aversion. I'm sure people will recognise that, but that sort of the idea of embracing and embedding volunteering does need a bit of shift of thinking, recognising what it is, but also not pigeonholing it either into any one type of volunteering or to being like unpaid work. It is different. We need tailored recruitment, management, government evaluation. Just because something works with staff doesn't mean it's the right thing for volunteers. We are working with NHS volunteer managers now, looking at recruitment processes and induction, and hoping that we might be able to kind of streamline a little bit some of the systems that do exist. So it needs to be, proportionate is a good word, really, proportionate to the context and to the risk involved, really, rather than standard across every type of volunteering. We need more partnerships, we need a growing evidence base, and we need to be better at learning from successful models and being able to adopt or adapt or implement them elsewhere. I bet others will probably recognise we're quite good at innovating, and then the innovation just kind of sits on a shelf in a report. You know, it's the next stage is the more difficult one, really. How do you move from pilot to mainstreaming? We need volunteering which is aligned to the needs of patients, to strategic priorities, and to system pressures. Of course, it's about what volunteers want to do, but there's no reason why it can't be strategically identified as to where this will make a big difference to everybody. And as I say, it matters to volunteers that what they're doing is what matters to people, that it's meaningful. More shared recruitment and training. Again, the NHS conversation will enable a little bit more of that, rather than every organisation and every health board doing its own thing in its own way, which makes kind of common language or movement of people between one organisation very tricky. It leads to a lot of duplication, and we need to hear volunteers' voice. Volunteers will be able to contribute from their experience of their their ideas for the future, and to lead, to help to shape developments. So this is the last slide, if you can move on, please, Anna. Really just to leave you with the questions. You may have answers now, it may be a question to ponder, but where do you see some of the opportunities? What I didn't say on the previous slide, one of the things that we think might help to bring about those various changes is that we do need to invest in strategic volunteering leads, if you like. Very often volunteering coordinators are there precisely to do that. They're there to coordinate volunteers, but they don't really have a lot of spare capacity to lift their heads above water and think, ooh, how could we work at a regional level? How could we bring this into the planning stage? How could we enable careers to develop out of this opportunity, and so on? So some of that headspace needs to be present. Somebody with authority, the mandate, the authority to be able to work in partnerships, or to invest, or to write proposals, at least for investing money in different directions. So more strategic leads for volunteering would enable some of those things. So the question here then is, where are the opportunities? What are the opportunities? And I'll leave you with that question. Thank you very much.
That's great. A lot of information there. I'll just stop sharing my slide to see, does anybody have any questions? I can see some comments in the chat box. Dawn Jones, did you want to speak to your comment there, or do you want me to read it out? Where are you?
Thank
Dawn?
you, Anna. Yes, I'm more than happy just to sort of add a little bit of context around the work we are doing with our volunteers and our volunteer to career strategy. So my role in the organisation is clinical lead for Connected Support Cymru, which is an innovative project that we're working with Welsh Government to pilot and test the role of remote monitoring in the community. So it kind of aligns with what a virtual ward concept. But the key part of this is that there's two tranches to the pilot. It's care homes and volunteers, and I'm particularly sort of interested in our volunteer roles because we've had a proof of concept over 12 months where we send our community welfare responders out into the community to support patients waiting in the community. And we're growing on that now to step up into using remote monitoring, patient wearables, that type of technology and digital support to be able to connect our patients with welfare support, communities and services. So we're looking at supporting patients to remain closer to home for their care. So yeah, that's and our volunteers are essential to that because they go out, they support patients with fundamentals of care, simply just being there as a support, but also providing very valuable information from patients, clinical intelligence that we can support decision making.
Lovely to meet you, Dawn. Would love to follow up with you about that. I think the work that WAST is doing is really exciting. We've had a few conversations with Jenny, who oversees the volunteering, but also more recently with Ella, who's doing some of the evaluation, just looking to see whether there are ways in which Helpforce can support that. But I think that what you're piloting in in Wales, as I understand it, has a lot of interest from the ambulance services around the UK, haven't they? This idea of extending the idea of community first responders to something much more low level, but supported with clinical professional expertise at the call centre, so that the wonders of remote technology allow things to be done in a very different way, don't they? With the backup support that's available can be so much greater with video and phone contact and so on, and the ability then to sort of escalate up or down as need be. No, it'd be great. We could have a long. I'd love to hear the development that you're describing, which I'm not so familiar with.
That's great.
Yeah.
There's also the other project that I find really interesting that WAST is starting, is that the community, I'm not sure of the right terminology, you can correct me here, Fiona, but it's with the welfare or community welfare officers that are going to the 999 calls for low level type
Community
interventions.
welfare responders.
That's the one.
Yeah,
That's a really interesting one, isn't it?
In the northwest of England, they call them low acuity responders. I mean, it's community welfare responders, CWR.
Mm-hmm.
And they're starting them in Wales, aren't they? Because I know
yes,
we're talking about,
yeah.
That's going to be really interesting.
Anna, we've actually got them in Wales. That's what I was talking about.
Yeah.
So we've from, I think it was April last year to May this year, we piloted community welfare responders, and I haven't got the stats on the top of my head, but I'm doing the clinical evaluation at the moment. But they went to over 1,000 calls, and a lot of the sort of positive impacts weren't just about reduce the amount of patients that needed to go to hospital, but also the welfare of the patients waiting for resources. So yeah, community welfare responders is a real growing part of our volunteer strategy, and Connected Support Cymru is part of that, connecting and supporting communities with patients and clinicians.
Right, thank you. Mark, do you want to speak to your comment that you've put in the chat box as well?
Yeah, no, I can. No, thank you. I just thought I'd put something in the chat box really as to what we're doing in Powys. So my role isn't necessarily working with volunteers, but community groups as part of the sort of the green spaces we have across our 9 community hospitals. So it's probably more about the green prescribing sort of aspect of it and the social prescribing framework that Welsh Government have launched. But yeah, I work closely with Vicky, our volunteer manager. So we just had a chat yesterday about safeguarding and developing procedures and making sure, because when we got community groups coming on board, obviously that all that procedure stuff needs to be developed, and that could be, well, it's envisaged that then that's the idea of all the green space we've got, which is quite a lot, certainly at Brontes Hospital, that we've got 42 apple trees in an orchard, we've got a horticultural therapist coming on board. And I am starting to find some of the restraint and the caution is starting to unravel a bit, actually. And I like to think, talking about from going to innovative. So it's an innovative role. My role is funded through the RPB as part of the health and care strategy the health board's got, and then we can then put the work that we're doing with the community groups into mainstream. So obviously I'm quite keen to make sure there's that golden thread between outcomes, outputs, performance that we're doing as a health board in the wards, and obviously I'll try and keep that consistent with community groups and what they're doing for their own clients, and also integrating the patients we've got in the hospitals with the clients, what the community groups can develop, whether it's mental health, pain management, long-term management, diabetes, dementia, etc., etc. So yeah, I just wanted to let the group know. I thought I'd attend. My role isn't quite volunteer managing, but it's closely aligned. So I'm quite keen to understand where the Bevan Commission and the documents you've kindly shared, Fiona, about where that might sit with community groups as a constituted community groups rather than volunteers, which are probably individuals, members of the public, who are volunteers, who are putting their own time and effort and their own rewards, rather than just a community group who are doing it as a collective, really, aren't they? So
yeah, and many of those community groups may well involve volunteers. So again, this is all part of the great. So there are some volunteers like most of the ones that Helpforce are concerned with through their pilot projects, they come under the auspices of the Health Board and therefore subject to its governance and its training and all of that. But you know, it's really good to hear of these sort of partnerships. And I think in Wales, we're a bit kind of ahead of the curve in that kind of thinking. You know, there are plenty of volunteers in the community. There are plenty of community groups who know how to manage volunteers, have done for years. It's their bread and butter. They actually aren't subject to quite the same constraints, and perhaps risk attitudes are different, and that can be an advantage. You know, if you're thinking about a partnership like this, working in a garden is not the same risk as working in, you know, an intensive ward. If you come across sort of challenges, then don't hesitate to get in touch, Mark. I can think of other projects where, you know, community gardens and hospitals and so on have. So there's nothing better than being able to come up with an example of others who've found a way through the problem. It can be kind of, you know, power to the elbow, can't it, to know of other successful projects if you're trying to sort of face some of the restraints yourself. So we'd be really pleased to talk about anything that you think we might be able to, you know, if we don't know, we can put it out on a wider network across the UK, you know, as well, to sort of see if there are people who've faced and overcome similar issues.
I went to the HEIW and asked there about my role and if there's any interest or, you know, about collaboration across Wales, which is kind of what I wanted to do today as well, you know, just to voice my role and my interest and enthusiasm to utilise community groups and the green spaces we've got. I've always been interested. I'm from an agricultural estate management background, to be honest. But you know, so that's where I'm coming at it from, not necessarily food production, but you know, food and nature and well-being you know, ties in really nicely. So which we've got lots of in Paris. I've already worked with had to be down to the Grange to the walled garden there. I'm talking with Sarah Thorne in Hordar, but the interest she's got, and Cardiff Vale are doing some work with community groups in the green spaces, and I know Swansea Bay, they've got a couple of fields working with community groups as well, and there may be other you know, works going on across Wales I don't know of. So I'm already doing that, Fiona.
And there may be connections with social prescribing. Did you mention social prescribing earlier? Because I mean, gardens are such wonderful healers, really, aren't they? You know, it's a very there's, you know, the working together with people, the using skills, being active, working with nature, all of that is very amazingly helpful for low-level mental health.
Absolutely. So from my aspect, it's really with the community groups are knocking on the door, and we're trying to manage that expectations as well, but also about what they want to do for their own benefit, their own preventative medicine aspects, keeping active, mental well-being. But as an added bonus, of course, it's working with the wards, with the patients who could refer from the ward, and you know, if they don't need to, you know, be in a bed, for example, and they're discharged, what happens there? So I'm really keen to make sure there's those, you know, community connectors, you know, there's that link with, well, hang on, it's a community group which could help you at the hospital, or maybe it's another community group elsewhere, you know, nearer their home. Doesn't have to be at the hospital. It's just
I love it, Mark. I love to hear about these kind of, you know, the crossing of boundaries between, you know, silo working is so infuriating, isn't it? This sort of thinking outside the box about how we can work across the traditional lines is really, really refreshing to hear.
Right, I can see Karen's commented as well. I don't know if that's just a comment for Mark, or did you want to add to the conversation, Karen?
In view of time, I'll keep it brief, but yes, most of the health boards have some sort of green health group. Some of this is green spaces, and is for health and well-being of staff as well as patients. But it involves staff giving their time, of which obviously many don't have a lot of spare time. But there is some interest in partnering with volunteers or local councils to extend that and get patient or community groups involved. So I think it's a really exciting area, and I'm glad to hear that you've got it off the ground formally. So please, every encouragement to keep yours going. I'm sure that there's lots of other people can learn from you and would be willing to work alongside you. So yes, there's some links I can send in an email later.
Great, thank you. Do we have any more questions from people in the room? The only comment I've got to make, Fiona, because you know we had issues with, and it's really great to hear that you're working now with the health boards to ease that recruitment problem, because we had big issues, as you know, on the Cardigan project, trying to link statutory services, health boards, with volunteers in community-based settings, that the recruitment processes were so prohibitive. We started off with 29 volunteers and ended up with 2. Simply because it was, but I understand there's been a lot of changes since, so it's great to hear that it's now becoming more flexible in terms of making it proportionate, I suppose, to their
Well,
roles.
Anna, I've quoted your experience more than once,
right.
and again, you know, it has been helpful to be able to point out that actually, you know, a thorough, comprehensive induction, as some might see it, it can be backfire really and be a barrier. So yeah, some quite interesting beginning of a journey, but we are working using the Learning at Wales portal. There is going to be a volunteering portal on the Learning at Wales platform, and the NHS managers are quite keen to just look again at what have always been regarded as the mandatory modules, which everybody agrees cover things that volunteers will never shouldn't be doing, you know, disposal of sharps, needles, you know, volunteers wouldn't be doing that. And so a lot of it isn't relevant. So just trying to sort of strip it back to what is relevant and tailored. And actually one health board has done quite a lot of work off its own bat, and with its own governance approval internally. They have condensed the so-called, you know, the recommended trainings into something much shorter. So we're going to be, you know, we're testing that out really now, and we'll be taking it through channels to discuss it with all the right people before it becomes an all Wales suggestion. But I think the time is right for us to look at that.
Well, with the move towards community-based care, it's definitely the time to do it. So I'd be really interested to hear more about that if any information comes through from it. And the only other comment I got is just interested in the definitions of volunteering. I think there's another category that's a bit like ad hoc, you know, the people who volunteer now and again, and whether that comes under informal. I'd be interested. I know we're limited to time now, but you know how you got that number of volunteers, because it's very difficult to quantify, isn't it? You got what, 938,000 volunteers in Wales. I mean, that figure must be like a piece of elastic, growing and shrinking constantly. And how you then define them into the different categories.
One of the difficulties in any sort of survey of volunteering is it depends what question you ask as to what answers you get. So that figure is from the Living in Wales survey, is that what it's called? And the question asked is something like, you know, they don't use the term volunteering. Do you give your time for free for any of the, you know, for community organisations, e.g. this, that and that, at least once in the last 12 months or something like that? So it's got a very it's very specific. If you just say, are you a volunteer? Lots of people perhaps won't think they are a volunteer. They just help out at a mother and toddler group, or they do sports coaching, but don't sort of use that title. So one has to be quite specific. And then, I mean, there are some people who do it not regularly. They're maybe formal and trained volunteers, but sort of episodic, like at a festival once a year or something of that kind. So yeah, it does mean a lot of different things. And the trouble with surveys is they need to be, for us to learn much from them, they need to be longitudinal. We need to be asking the same question over a period of time, and then you can at least draw some conclusions from the changes. But different surveys don't always ask the same question, which makes that harder.
No, that is such a huge topic, isn't it? We could be here all morning talking about it, but I just want to thank you very much. It was really interesting. If anybody, we will be sharing the presentations with everybody afterwards, so they got links to the the other reports that you've done and the research publications, but they've also got your contact details on the slides. So if anybody's got any further questions for Fiona, please contact Fiona direct and access the links. We will be sharing the presentations later today or tomorrow with everybody. Great, thank you very much. Just a quick now, I did mention Mentimeter, so we're going to try and share it. If you can quickly, there we go. Can you see this on my screen? Type in the number that I gave you. So it's, can you see the, yeah. So the number is, if you go to menti.com, menti.com, and use the code 78216801, and then you can see there's different categories. Did you find the presentation interesting? Was the topic relevant to you? And will the information that was shared have any impact? So if you can just use the slider there to score the presentation, we'd be really grateful. Thanks. And then if you press the submit button afterwards. That's great. We'll keep that alive for the next couple of minutes whilst we move on to our next presentation. Kat, is it you presenting?
Oh, yeah, good morning, everyone. No, it's John and I are going to present.
Oh, John's there. Sorry, I couldn't see him
John
earlier.
is here in the meeting.
Right, hiya. Do you want to share your own presentation? I don't think I've got a copy, so
yeah,
can you?
Yes,
yeah. So this is, I'm going to introduce you to both John and Kat from SLiNK-TECH, and I went to see a fantastic demo of the drone equipment and the technology that they're using in healthcare last week, wasn't it, up in Snowdonia Aerospace? It was a bit mind-blowing, especially the concept of having air taxis. I think that took it to the nth degree for me. But so I shall let you introduce yourself and the work a bit more now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks for the opportunity to speak today. It's fantastic to hear about some of the volunteering, but this is something slightly different. So I'm John Goudie, I'm the CEO of SLiNK-TECH. I'd like to introduce Kat.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Tilke. I'm a project coordinator for SLiNK-TECH, and I've been working for the last couple of months on a project in collaboration with NHS Wales, looking at how in the future drone infrastructure might fit into NHS supply chains. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today.
Fantastic, thank you. So who are we? We're a small company based in Bristol. So we're focused on infrastructure for drones. So there's lots of companies building drones, but there's not as many companies building the landing infrastructure that makes these drone networks possible. So we've got a lot of experience doing flight testing. We've managed to operate our portal system at 5 different sites in the UK, and we've got a lot of experience on the drone and technology side. And we're bringing that to the NHS through a Innovate UK innovation contract that we've been supported by the Welsh Blood Service, WAST, and a wider NHS Wales team. So we are currently running a number of Innovate UK projects. So we've been funded to build our technology and advance it towards commercialization. We've been part of accelerators, and we have a great research partnership with the University of Bristol. Some of the partners we're working with on the projects we are associated with is, again, University of Bristol, who provides flight path research, Snowdonia Aerospace Centre, which is Llanbedr in northwest Wales. It's a great flight test site for drones and future air taxis. And Goka is a cybersecurity company. Sensoris makes radar technology. Radar also makes radar technology, and Auriga is a drone operator. So Snowdonia is a kind of a remote old RAF air base from World War II, and they have done lots of different research there over the years, and they're really trying to pivot themselves towards the future of aviation, which is highly automated drones and air taxis. And so this site has lots of facilities. It has hangars, it has air traffic control towers, and they're trying to position themselves as a center of excellence for testing these new types of operations and new types of vehicles. The key thing about this site is that it has a danger area. So whereas you might have a track to test cars in, aircraft need a danger area for which they need to test the vehicles in. And so they're connected to a lot of remote airspace off the coast, but they also have a danger area which allows companies to come and organizations to come and test their operations and test their vehicles without having to go through lots of different hoops you might expect for a kind of an aerospace project. So it's exciting to us because SLiNK-TECH, we build infrastructure and we've deployed our first vertiports at that site, and it allows us to bring customers like logistics companies, NHS staff to come and test their operations here in a safe area. So what's happening with the future of flight? So there's lots of companies building vehicles. This is actually an air taxi currently in development in Bristol, but also they're building drones to carry logistics objects over longer distances. So lots of vehicles being developed, lots of investment into the vehicle side, and it's quite exciting to see all these new vehicles popping up. There's also kind of software that manages the motorways in the sky. So this is called UTM, or uncrewed traffic management. So these are the connections between the different locations. So you could think of the connection in the sky between Wrexham and Cardiff, or Talbot Green and Swansea. All these different locations need a connection from A to B. There's also infrastructure. So infrastructure means the locations in which they land, and the software that manages them, the hardware that controls them, and whether or not these are kind of small vertiports at hospitals for logistics, or whether or not they're kind of full-scale passenger experiences mimicking airports. But what barriers do we really face with these networks of air taxis? So obviously we need to make these networks commercially viable. They need to be scalable. There will be high network costs, expensive to staff, potentially challenging deployments. And there's also the regulatory hurdles that would potentially prevent a system being installed at a certain location. So what's our solution? It's called Portal. And here's a little video to showcase what we're working on. Right. Hopefully the audio wasn't too loud. I wasn't sure how it sounded through.
We couldn't hear the audio there, John. I don't know if you want to replay it and
no,
play
it's just a bunch of generic music. So think of a song in your head, and that's fine. So yeah, Portal is a technology that is deployable for managing these landing locations of the future. So in simplest terms, Portal scans the air for other airspace users, planes, people on hang gliders, birds. It scans the ground for kind of staff, intruders, operators, anyone or anything on the ground, and it uses that intelligence to tell all the drones where to go. So we're not the drone manufacturers. We're not the kind of the motorway in the sky. We're really focused on making the landing area safe and easy to operate for kind of lower skilled staff. And these aren't lower skilled from every job type. It's lower skilled drone operators. So people who aren't typically pilots. Our view is that they could operate these landing sites safely and effectively. So these are people like the people in the blood bank, people who run logistics at these NHS sites. We want everyone to be able to use these landing systems without having to become, really highly trained pilots and having to be able to fill all these forms in to support the regulators. So Portal can be deployed nearly anywhere. It can be deployed permanently, as we have done at Snowdonia, and it can be deployed temporarily in the use case shown below. But we use our advanced sensor technology to dynamically guide and navigate drones within our controlled airspace. So here's a picture of the first vertiport that's been deployed at Snowdonia. So we have painted a very, very large vertiport, which allows us to support the next generation of air taxis. And obviously it's large enough to land smaller drones for testing. So why is Portal important? It's really important that we lower the cost of these operations long term. So there's lots of companies building drones, and they're doing some great pilot missions between A to B, and they're flying blood samples, pathology samples at low scale. But it's really important that we focus on the automation side of things. So with this Portal system, we could deploy it temporarily or permanently. We lower the costs. It integrates with most UAVs, so we've landed lots of different types of drones with our system, and most importantly, it's highly automated. We can command one-to-many drones, so one of these portals can handle multiple, up to 10 drones at a time, maybe even more. We're rapidly deployable, and we're agnostic to location, and we're currently in talks with the regulators to try and get our system as a piece of approved hardware and technology to land drones at scale. So how do we fit in? So you can imagine on the left might be Wrexham, on the right might be Talbot Green. We focus on the local area. So anything up to 1 kilometre away from the portal, we detect it, we track the objects, and we control the vehicles. In between, we have a bunch of software that connects to cloud-based solutions that will manage the flight in between. And there's quite a number of companies working on the Sky motorways. So the vehicle gets handoff and control. It's a bit technical, this, but it basically, when we're in control of the vehicle, it's in the local area. When the vehicle gets passed on to the UTM or the Sky motorway control, it's under their control throughout the middle of the mission until it reaches another portal, in which it then gets commanded to land. So we've had a number of kind of opportunities given to us through Innovate UK. So we've been funded through Innovate UK's Future Flight Challenge, where they're investing in infrastructure that enables these highly automated drone operations to become real. And so we've delivered a number of MVPs, we've done a bunch of flight tests, and now we're starting to really get to the point where it's getting exciting, where we're kind of at the pre-commercialization stage. This year, we were awarded a Innovate UK contract to support the NHS with understanding concepts of operations, financial, kind of cost targets associated with adoption of the technology, because obviously we could push technology, as much as we want, but it really needs to have a pull from the financial side and the financial sector in order to make this thing commercially viable. And Kat will go into more detail about the project goals shortly, but after this, we hope to support a number of logistics operations, not just in the healthcare sector, but how can we leverage some of the kind of standard B2B logistics and the infrastructure to support kind of healthcare applications, which are really important, have a really a near-term impact that's exciting for both the health sector and the regulators. So as mentioned before, one of the use cases is logistics. So on the left is a hospital, on the right we're showing our system as a render in how it might be operated. But Portal can be deployed really anywhere. We can put it up in the loading docks of the world, the rooftops, the hospital car parks, the business parks of the world, and really bring logistics to any location possible. So our vision is to make these landing areas as cost effective as possible. Instead of having a company buy specific land, put up a fancy structure, spend lots of investment before they realize these networks are valuable, we want to lay out cost effective portals at every location physically possible. And so each of these different locations, they all have different needs, different requirements. They can all be supported by the portal technology. And with lower cost vertiports, we can put more portal hubs in, and that gives a greater accessibility to these networks, and that really provides value for society. Bit of behind the scenes, we've spent the last number of weeks in Snowdonia installing the permanent system. As you can see, even Grady the dog got involved with the high-vis jacket on. But the important thing is that we did a large demonstration last week in which we invited industry, and we invited a separate day for NHS staff to come along, where we demonstrated our system in operation at this site under the danger area. And we got a pretty cool video. So the intention of this site is to become a permanent test site for testing these types of vehicles. So all these new novel aircraft that are coming out, they'll be carrying the blood samples, the pathology samples, will be targeted to be tested here and certified for use at hospitals and business parks, etc. So this is the kind of the stepping point in which we have these drone networks become ubiquitous, and it's quite exciting to be at the forefront, and we're really privileged to be working on a project with some of the great team at the NHS Wales. So moving on to Kat's part of the presentation. So this is going to be discussing some of the details around the research we've been completing, and really a call to arms if anyone else is interested in supporting some of these, you know, any ad hoc workshops we can provide support to. We're just happy to have conversations with anyone who's interested. Thank you, Kat.
Thanks, John, and thank you again, Anna, for having us today and for coming up to North Wales last week. So yeah, I'm going to talk for a little bit now about the work we've been doing over the past couple of months with the Welsh Health Drone Initiative Partnership, which includes the Welsh Blood Service, the Welsh Ambulance Service, and then Snowdonia Aerospace Centre. And as John mentioned, I suppose the purpose of this presentation is firstly to share with you, you know, the medical community in Wales, some of the work we've been doing, but also really, you know, after showing you what we've done, to invite you to share with us any thoughts you have about how this might integrate with services that you work with, because the purpose of the project really is exploratory. It's thinking about, you know, we accept that this technology is on the way and it's coming and it's going to change the way that we work, and it's about thinking from the get-go how best we can deploy it in a way that is useful and effective and is going to benefit the most people. Of the first phase of this project, we've just finished running a series of workshops.
Kat, you're on mute. Sorry, Kat's on mute. I'm not sure she can hear me.
Hello.
That's
Hi.
better.
Go back 20 seconds, Kat. You hit the space bar and you're on mute. So.
Oh, apologies. So yeah, John, are you able to click through? There's a couple of bits that need to go up on this slide. And again, yeah, lovely. Thank you. So yeah, we are at the end of the first stage of our project currently, which means that we've run a series of workshops with people in the ambulance service and the blood service, in EMITs, and had discussions about how they envisaged this kind of infrastructure possibly fitting in with the services that they work on. And at this stage, we've been able to come up with a kind of roadmap as to what we think a kind of network of drones might look like in Wales in the future. And so there are two maps here on the slide, as you can see. The one on the left is a population density map. And I mean, I don't need to tell anyone here that we've got the South Wales corridor, the North Wales corridor, and then the space in between Mid Wales. We've got a much lower population density, and with that, the network of roads reflects the fact that you know, we have that it's a rural environment. And so what we'd really be looking to do with a prospective drone network would be to speed up connections and to sort of integrate connections between these rural communities in a way that the road network doesn't currently do. And we've been, I'll come back to this map a little bit later on, but this is a sort of suggestion of a network of drone hubs that we'd potentially be proposing that runs from Talbot Green at the Welsh Blood Centre in the south, all the way up to Wrexham, and potentially St Asaph in the north, where we're expecting the new EMIT Centre to be opening shortly, and then a corridor over there in the west, joining the north to south, with nodes running again from east to west to join in, for example, Aberystwyth, to the likes of Welshpool, and then running down to Talbot Green to integrate all of these services. But really the focus would be on providing a service that integrates, you know, the more rural or challenging to navigate to. John, are you able to click onto the next slide, please?
Yeah.
Thank you. So I'm going to talk through a use case that we have developed in collaboration with the ambulance service. Could you just go back a moment there, John? Thank you. So this was developed over 2 full days. We sat down. We had 2 workshops, one in South Wales, just outside of Swansea, and one up in Wrexham, with paramedics and policy leaders working in the ambulance service. And together we worked through. We came up with a couple of ideas of how this might integrate with their workflow day to day, and then we identified one that we thought had potentially really high value and worked on to develop together and flesh out properly. And so what we looked at was the use of drones to provide a supplementary restocking service to ambulances. This map here, and this is based on, I'll go into slightly more detail in a moment, but this map here on the right, apologies it's quite small, but hopefully you can all see the little orange dots. There's one up in Wrexham, and then 2 in Cardiff, and one just to the north there. But these orange dots represent the 4 make-ready stations in Wales. What the make-ready stations are restocking centres for the ambulance service that are open 24 hours, 7 days a week, and are guaranteed all of those 24 hours, 7 days a week to hold all of the essential kit for the ambulances. There are, beyond these 4 centres, there's a total of 82 ambulance centres in Wales, but with the exception of these 4, the rest aren't open for 24 hours, 7 days a week, and they're not guaranteed to hold the essential kit. What that means is, for crew who who have to use some of their kit while out on a shout, depending on what it is that they need afterwards, they're potentially looking at having to come off the run and drive to one of these centres to restock, to make their vehicle ready to go back on the run again. John, could you click through to the next slide, please? So this is just a visual really representing the current workflow as it exists at the moment, and it's more or less what I just described. So a crew might respond to a call out, and if they use kit which is deemed essential to respond to a particular category of call, then they're unable to, at present they're unable to respond to that call category again until they've restocked their kit. So what that would involve is then notifying control that they need to restock, notifying control that they need to restock, and then attending either their local station, or if their local station is closed or doesn't have the necessary kit, driving to one of the make ready stations, which you can imagine if you're a crew working in Aberystwyth, you're looking at potentially a very long journey before you can restock. At the point where the ambulance is restocked, the crew is able to go back onto the run, but at that point they may not be in their local area, and so then what we're looking at is this kind of domino effect where crews who are still on call are being pulled out of area to cover people who have gone to restock. So you get this kind of downstream effect. So what we would be looking at doing with a potential drone network would be installing vertiports at the 78 local stations that are not make ready stations, which would then enable, rather than an ambulance with its skilled crew coming off the run to go and restock, which would then enable control to make a phone call to the make ready station, the staff at the make ready station to load the drone, and the drone to fly the necessary equipment to the local station, with the outcome being then that the amount of time the crew is off the run is shortened, and you're reducing the number of staff that have to drive out of area during any given shift. So hopefully keeping ambulances in the area that they're intended to be serving throughout the course of their shift. Does that make sense? And are there any questions about this particular use case before we move on to another example? No? Lovely. Okay, we'll click through to the next one. Okay, yeah, and so this again is another Another potential use case that we worked on with the Welsh Blood Service, and in this case we looked at reducing the lead times for complex cross matches for hospitals in North Wales. And apologies, this slide might be a little bit small on your screens depending on the setup that you've got, but I will talk through the workflow as it is currently and then the changes that we were proposed to make. This slide actually requires updating. So that 36 to 48 hours there in the middle of the slide is indicative of the lead time as it stands currently. But this is actually an incorrect figure. It should say 36 to 60 plus hours. That's the lead time that we're currently looking at for some of the complex cross matches up in North Wales. The way that those are processed at the moment, on weekday mornings, a van leaves Wrexham, the blood service in Wrexham, at about 11 o'clock in the morning. And it starts its journey along the North Wales corridor all the way up to Ysbyty Gwynedd, where it drops off cross matches or sorry, blood requested from earlier in the week or previously, and picks up samples that are to be tested for cross matching. So by the time it's completed its journey running up along that north corridor, it normally arrives at Ysbyty Gwynedd at around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and then it will start winding its way back to Wrexham, where it normally arrives late afternoon. Later that evening, about 10 o'clock at night, a second van, which is driven up from Talbot Green, will arrive at Wrexham, and there will be an exchange. It drops off goods which will be to be distributed the following morning, and it picks up the samples for cross-matching and makes its way back to South Wales, so that those can be tested the following morning. Depending on the complexity of the cross-matches that are to be tested, and depending on the workload that the blood service in Talbot Green are dealing with at any particular time, we're then looking at 24 to 36 hours down there in Talbot Green for the processing to be made, at which point then the samples are returned to Wrexham and distributed on that 11 o'clock in the morning van that I talked about at the beginning. So as you can see, it's a very long, drawn-out process, and a kind of secondary effect of that is that if cross-matching samples are requested towards the tail end of the week and are needed urgently, then quite often this will have to be outsourced to Liverpool, who have the capacity to process more quickly. Obviously Liverpool, that falls under NHS England, so there's a cost associated with that, which is then also passed on to the Welsh Blood Service. So we have a situation at the moment where for this particular subset of cross matches we're looking at a very slow turnaround time and also a high cost because of the need to outsource on a regular basis. If you click through again, John, thank you. So quite simply, the solution that we would be proposing in this example would be to install a vertiport at the hospitals in the north, potentially Aberystwyth as well, kind of out on the west coast. So rather than have to rely on this slightly clunky and drawn out two van exchange system, hospitals could directly dispatch samples for cross matching to the blood service. So we anticipate that if we were to put this in place, we could reduce the lead time to more like 24 to 30 hours rather than the 60 plus that we're currently looking at. And of course then a knock-on effect of that, because of the increased capacity to process cross matches more quickly, we would be looking at a reduction in samples being outsourced to Liverpool. And then a reduction in costs associated with that. That's a summary of just two of the use cases that we've had the opportunity to develop in collaboration with WAST and with the Welsh Blood Service. There are obviously many different applications for drones in healthcare. And I know that previously Snowdonia Aerospace Centre have done work with the Welsh Ambulance Service trialling defibrillator deployment in rural environments, and globally as well. We know that there are projects and initiatives working on all kinds of sort of community interventions in the US. We've got projects that are delivering naloxone to suspected opioid overdoses, and a couple of weeks ago in Sweden, the first life was saved with a defibrillator that was deployed to somebody in a village on a drone. And so really, hopefully this presentation has given you a sort of taste of the kind of things that we're looking at and the kind of things that we've started to think about. But really, you know, what I would like to, and you'll have these slides afterwards, but I would really like to encourage you, if you can think of ways that this technology could benefit your service, or you know, the communities that you're working in, to share those thoughts with us, because you are the experts really. And as I said, we know this technology is coming, and what we would like to do is try and make sure that it's deployed in a way that is useful and effective from the beginning. And it really is as well. You know, it's a new technology, and it's a new infrastructure that we're developing, and it really is a case of the more use cases and the more nodes that we have to this network, the more valuable it becomes. And so we really are interested in hearing about as many, you know, different novel applications as possible, and we'll be very happy to discuss those with you. Thank you very much, and I think we're open to questions now.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you both. We have got a few comments in, I don't know why I'm suddenly echoing, a few comments in the chat box. Benjamin Gwachmaid, would you like to raise your question about the size of the landing zone?
Sure, yeah, diolch. Thanks very much, John and Catherine, for today. Really interesting. So I should sort of give you a little bit of context around the questions I've put in the chat. I'm a Welshpool Town Councillor, as well as a lecturer at the Intensive Learning Academy at USW. And we're working on helping students across the NHS and public sector lead digital transformation. But I see all these things, and we have a lot of pharmacy-based students. And so my questions in the chat is sort of about a couple of things. Keeping in mind that I'm also a Welshpool Town Councillor, so I am entirely biased toward rural towns, the villages, like the one my mum lives in, for example, which is about, well, I think it's sort of 7 to 8 miles away from the town itself. And so my questions were about, you know, what's the sort of smallest portal landing size you can foresee in the future? Like, for example, could your average pharmacy have one installed on, say, half of their roof? You know, let's say they've got solar panels on the south-facing side. Could the pharmacy then have a sort of quite small thing on the north side? And the second one was kind of about whether or not you're sort of looking at crisis-like situations where drone deliveries can happen, whether it's for actual, say, future climate change crises, or whether it's just because Wales sometimes seems like the lack of infrastructure feels like there are crisis situations. Could you deliver to, say, a village autonomously from, say, town hubs? And could those deliver to something like an Amazon locker-like pharmacy device, which some pharmacies in South Wales have? And I know that my students would be really interested to talk to you about this kind of stuff, as would I about the network you're developing. I didn't put it in the chat because I've got my own sort of project I'm applying for Horizon funding for this year, which is to partly do what you've done. We've got a colleague, Tian Sheng, who works on air taxis, and I've always thought that amphibious connections between the north coast and the south coast of Wales would, well, make the journey half an hour to 45 minutes at amphibious planes, sorry, rather than the 7 hours on the train or whatever it is. So 2 questions really are about the size of the portal landing. Are you able to do it autonomously to lockers? And I guess thirdly, would you like to speak to my students?
John, you're on mute.
Yeah, third one's a resounding yes. We're always happy to speak to kind of researchers and students, especially if they have wacky ideas. To be clear, this project started off a wacky idea about how do we get rid of pilots and how do we minimize the risks of these flight networks. So I think happy to speak to anyone. In regards to the size of the portal, so we showed you quite a larger portal location that can handle kind of helicopter-sized air taxis. That uses multiple portals to cover a larger area. So we kind of tessellate the intelligence and the coverage, and we share data between all the different sensor networks. We have done landings down to 2 by 2 meters, so we can put it into the size of a car park, for example. Could use up the 2 unused spots in the corner of the car park, or the rooftop use case. Look, I think this thing could put anywhere, but realistically, I think the safest spot's on the ground. There's lots of companies who are flying drones and then dangling a little chain underneath with a bag on the chain, and they drop it off. And that's one good way of mitigating ground risk, and that's the main reason they're using a winch system. But I think with kind of higher volume, higher payload, kind of more like pallet-sized deliveries, you have to have a landing system that keeps the area safe. So yeah, we're happy to support all different types of use cases. We do not have a locker solution at the moment. We haven't developed one. There are companies building kind of specific drone lockers. They have their own downsides, so they don't have very high capacity. They don't have the ability to store hundreds of things in them because they have to have a huge mechanism to manage the package. But they are coming, and there's some interesting companies developing kind of package handling systems. We're very much focused on the high volume, high capacity. How do you get lots and lots of drones to land in a small car park? That's kind of our angle. To answer your questions?
Absolutely. Yeah, and I'll have to grab your contact details just for my students and me for the future.
Happy to have a chat with anyone who's interested. We've been running these workshops with a few kind of volunteers who kind of heard about it on newsletters and stuff, but we're happy to have ad hoc sessions. We've done it all electronically, so anyone can really contribute and add value. But thanks for the questions. I see there's more questions in the chit chat.
Yeah, can you pick them? Do you want me to direct them? I think Moishi. I'm sorry if I haven't pronounced that name properly.
Yeah, please go ahead. Okay, questions about the payload.
Yeah.
So I guess, so Moishi Mary has asked, what's the payload? How biosecure is the cargo? Could the wrong person collect it? Only flight licensing issues. So these are all good questions, and a lot of the big concerns about insurance and risk associated with these drone networks is about, if infected blood lands on me, what happens then? I think we're not the drone company. However, we do have the intelligence and the landing system to be able to kind of secure the landing area. So if an intruder comes in, we can stop the traffic from departing. We could, we have a kind of sophisticated booking engine, so we could add kind of permissions associated with the loader and the person who's loading it. One interesting thing we found out in the workshops is there's a whole. I'm not from the medical background. I'm a electronics engineer, so sometimes a bit naive to the way these processes work. But what we found out was there's a huge amount of training just to be able to handle the blood, and so our thought is that it's probably better to teach the blood handler how to push the button on the drone system than it is to teach every pilot how to be a blood handler. That's one of the interesting insights from one of the workshops we had. Licensing issues around flights. Look, we have a number of steps to take before SLiNK-TECH and Portal are successful as a landing system. So we have the system certified for kind of all the safety critical control it completes, and we need drones to be licensed to be able to fly these distances without pilots on board. So we're moving in parallels, but the thing is we have the best test area to test these types of operations. A drone it knows where it is, but it could be flying anywhere for itself to continue flight. We can test these types of operations at Snowdonia in the near term, and then push towards getting the approvals to do these missions on small scale across the health network, and then long term, when hopefully every company is adopting drone technology, then these networks are ubiquitous, and we'll look back at this day as kind of a mild roadblock in the tech development of the UK.
Can I just add something to that? So just what you said there, John, and I think the question about biosecurity is really important, and absolutely a valid question. I think part of the reason why we've focused on the use cases that we did is that they were some of the lower risk use cases in terms of biosecurity that were suggested. And I think that's absolutely not to say that we couldn't explore things like pathology or control, transport of controlled drugs and this sort of thing later on. But it is a new and emerging technology, and I think at this stage we want to prove the concept in practice, and then those are things that that we absolutely can look at further down the line. There's no reason why at the moment, as John mentioned, people who are trained to say, for example, if you've got a card that allows you to scan in when you take an ABG or a VBG, there's no reason why we couldn't take that concept and apply it to people who are who are loading samples in and off the drones, and you can't access it without your code and this sort of thing. Like there are solutions that exist in other kind of pathways and technologies that we could adapt and apply to the system that we're proposing, I think.
Yep. I think a key point, lots of people have kind of given us feedback. We don't see the drones taking over every kilogram of things that are transported across the NHS. It will take focus on time criticality, kind of samples, pathology samples, and in the near term, it will probably only take a fraction of the total volume of goods and supplement the service. Maybe longer term, it becomes more obvious decision, but in the near term, and through this Innovate UK contract, we will be defining a cost model and a kind of a adoption roadmap for the governance that supports these, the Vilindit Trust, the NHS, the Welsh Government, these kind of people. So it's a supplementary service in the near term and not a replacement.
Thanks. There's a question there about the weather.
Yes, so the weather will affect the drone's performance. So like I said, we're not intending to replace 99.99% of weather conditions. So if you look at weather reports, they give you 99 percentile winds might be a gale force 6. So it's very unlikely a drone could, or a van, to be honest, would drive out in a gale force 6. So there are limitations to the vehicles, but with more landing zones and more landing areas and a network that's more accessible and distributed across a rural area, you can potentially mitigate some of these range issues by landing it at closer and closer vertiports. So you could hop across instead of having a direct flight. With these automated vehicles, landing 7 times on the way between Cardiff and Wrexham is no more challenging than flying all in one go. It has, there's less people involved with the missions, there's less human intervention, there's less, the only thing you imagine you do is charge the battery up twice as much because you have a headwind. So it's quite, when these autonomous vehicles become ubiquitous, it's going to be quite a big game changer for lots of different industries, not just the healthcare sector. I see Rachel's mentioned about some stuff about stakeholder perspective at use of drones. I've read a lot of research from, I think the University of Birmingham's doing a lot of research around public perception. And I think people are much more likely to accept a drone flying life-saving blood than they are to have a rich person get their Rolex about 10 minutes quicker. But I think realistically, if we can leverage some of the life-saving and save some lives with time, and there's a cost benefit. There's also a life benefit associated with the timeliness of pathology samples, as Kat talked about. So yeah, it's quite. I think some of the concerns from the public will be alleviated, especially if there's specific safe landing infrastructure. There's these drones are flying on kind of rural paths away from cities. It'd be much more easy to adopt and accept if it's for a healthcare application in the near term.
Great, thank you.
I think
Can
I've
I
answered all
ask
the
a few
question.
now?
Yeah, please go on.
Sorry, just because the other use that we talked about was, and I've mentioned it in the chat about the because in Mid Wales, like I mentioned, we're very poorly catered for in terms of actual hospitals. We do have the district hospital in Bronglais and Aberystwyth, but we also have a number of community hospitals which are vital to the people who live in the region. I can see there's Anne Thomas is online now with a couple of students up there in Dolgellau. They've got a great community hospital, so waving. But you know, the potential, not all community hospitals are fully stocked in terms of medication. The potential is there, I suppose, to deliver medication once the security and the legislation, the licensing, etc. issues are covered. But there is a number of applications, particularly in rural areas where road infrastructure is so poor. So, you know, to have a drone be able to deliver would be great from a rural perspective. I think the only concerns are obviously the security factor, which you have more or less, well, you have partly covered in terms of, you know, the landing. And, you know, at your demo, you showed us how if there was an invader or uncleared person entering the landing zone, that the drones would freeze and it would not land. But I suppose there are other concerns around security. So security and risk. And the other one that was mentioned was the battery life and size. And, you know, you mentioned the technology is advancing at a rate of knots in terms of how far these drones can go and the weight that they could carry based on battery size and durability, I suppose. Those are just some things that perhaps I don't know if you want to expand on.
Yeah, I'm happy to expand on the kind of the expansion of technology. I guess, you know, the same way the airlines, they have a different type of aircraft that flies between, does the pond hop between Dublin and Bristol. There's a different type of aircraft that flies, you know, 400 people to Singapore. There's a different type of aircraft that flies 130 people to Magaluf on a weekend from Luton. So there'll be different types of drones that land do different types of missions. And our angle, we are biased. We are a company building infrastructure, but if we can build and provide infrastructure that allows the NHS to adopt any of the new types of drones that come out, you know, maybe one can carry 50 kilograms, 50 kilometers, one that can do 200 kilometers but carry 4 kilograms. Every aircraft has a trade-off, and if we can provide a landing system that supports all the different types of vehicles that you may encounter and may need to run these missions, then we can support them. And so our angle is, don't focus on the drone itself, focus on how you operate them and how the infrastructure looks, and then the drones will become commoditized over time. That is our differentiator, and we're hoping that, you know, with some input from the NHS team about how these things operate, we can really create a simple operating system that is as easy to use as someone ordering McDonald's at you know, Big Mac at McDonald's, or like simplifying it down to a kind of a push button screen is our intention. And we demonstrated some of that at the event.
Yeah, thanks, John. But the other thing then is just to mention the air taxi potential, because you've talked about this maybe being mainstreaming in a couple of years, you're piloting, testing, but then after that, the potential to actually carry people with a vertical landing.
There's about 100 companies building air taxi sized vehicles for carrying passengers. These range from anywhere from one person. There's a company called Skyfly Technologies in England building one person mini air taxis. There's companies building 2-person air taxis, and these air taxis will be used for kind of air ambulance operations, and they're all pushing towards high levels of autonomy. So basically any old idiot from the street could be able to operate these things and fly them. And so with that becomes a huge new potential for having more autonomous air taxi and air ambulance services that could, you know, carry patients between hospitals. They could collect them from kind of predefined collection areas or vertiports. So it could be quite exciting. Obviously, with the reduction in maintenance costs with electric aviation, the reduction in pilot costs, it could really be quite a game changer for the cost. I have read that, you know, helicopters is at $1,000 an hour, £1,000 an hour to operate a helicopter, including all the fuel, the maintenance, the new parts, the pilots, the infrastructure. So if we can reduce that cost, it could be very exciting for adoption.
Great, thanks. Sorry, I was just noticing Gina's put a comment. Do you want to speak to that, Gina?
Yeah, I just popped that in there because I've got to leave shortly. But thanks for your presentation, John. It's really interesting. And I know we've had discussions within pharmacy around, time critical medications that need to get to places. Our production unit for chemotherapy is down in Haverfordwest, but it has to travel by road up to the other acute sites. So, there's a time element there, but very early discussions, but we'd love to get in contact with you offline if that's okay.
Yeah, of course. And I think Kat shared her email address in the comments. It's kat@slink-tech.co.uk.
Yeah, I've got that. Thank you.
I'll put my email
Brilliant.
address in there also if anyone wants to bother me.
It's great. Does anybody else have any questions for John or Kat? No. It's lovely. Thank you ever so much for us. I think it's a thought-provoking presentation because I think we're still a step behind in understanding the full practical application, but it's very exciting, particularly for us living and working in rural areas. And I'm sure that maybe not in our generation, our kids' generation, the whole world is going to see a very different area landscape. Can we all just move on now and just do a Mentimeter evaluation? So again, it's the same as previously. You type in the same code. I'll just share the screen. So you go to menti.com, type in 7821-6801. A lot of you already got there before me. So if you just want to use that slider scale and drag it to the rating, that would be great. Thank you very much.
Now I know the contestants on Strictly feel with the rating scheme.
We'll share these with you afterwards. I mean, because it's such far-fetched technology, it might not be quite so relevant to people's work today, but I bet it will be in a few years' time. So, but it's really interesting, and I think it's very thought-provoking. And if you could possibly give me a copy of a presentation, I'll make sure that everybody who's here today gets a copy. The only thing I'm thinking is if you've got your video on it, it might be better to have a hyperlink to that if possible, because I know sometimes there is restrictions in sharing it across the NHS network. Yeah, lots of comments there saying it was very interesting and thought-provoking. So that draws today's session to an end. I just want to again apologise that my camera's not working. And hopefully it'll be rectified by next time. And thank everybody for attending. I will send out the 2 presentations from this morning, and I will also send out information on the events we've got going on next week at the Royal Welsh, after I've had a few inquiries about them. Okay, diolch yn fawr pawb. Thank you ever so much, and ta-ra.
Thanks, Anna. Thanks all.
Ta-ra.